right, well, thanks for having me down. Nice to order this nice chilly day that we have. I got to spend the day, got down early this morning and went and spent the day out at one of your wonderful new parks, the Parklands at Floyd's Fork. All day, got a personal tour by one of the directors out there, so it's absolutely a fantastic system that's coming online here in Louisville. So take some of those ideas back to date. My real job, actually, I'm the park planning manager for Five Rivers Metro Parks, which is our metro parks in Dayton. So we all come down and visit and snoop around and see what everybody else is doing to take ideas back. So starting off, how many have grown a Maxillaria of some sort? A few of you, probably most of you is Tenuifolia. This is sort of the common one that you'll see. And really, it's a neat genus. It's been around. You'll see in the slides. Been around a long time. Just not a lot of interest until fairly recently on the genus. I brought a couple of the monograph on Maxillaria was published a couple of years ago. So if you want to take a look at that, really kind of a neat book. But just a couple of things. This is my growing area. I wish it was still that empty. It's sort of we're climbing through as most collections do, but I've got a 14 by 27 foot greenhouse. Mostly try to keep it as intermediate as possible, although the temperatures this time of year gets nice and warm, just like it is outside. And most of these guys tolerate it pretty well. There's a few cool growing Maxillarias we'll talk about that I keep killing, but I want to grow them and you'll see why. One of these days I'll figure out how to keep it cool enough. But I do collect rainwater off the roof in a rain barrel. I've got two 300-gallon tanks that I supplement with regular city water. We haven't rained in Dayton in a month until this morning, so it's been very, very dry. But they'll tolerate the city water. If you've got decent water quality, we'll do just fine on these guys. So then I repump it back through a fertilizer proportioner to inject my fertilizer back into to make that work. So this is kind of the range of Maxillaria. They are found up in the Caribbean in a couple of versions, but most of them are really down in the Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, and Peru range is where most of them do come from. So there are lots of different ranges. We'll talk about 650 different species of Maxillaria. So I think, Ruth, you said I've got 4 hours tonight, right?
Let's go for it.
All right. So, there's really pretty much a Maxillaria species that'll grow in your conditions. So they range anywhere from sea level all the way well up into the cloud forest. So lots of different temperature ranges. One of the things I do like to talk about that's very important with orchids, and it's something that's us as orchid societies are responsible for, species conservation. We've got a lot of native species. How many realize that we actually have more native species here in the Midwest than Hawaii has? Hawaii only has 4 native species of orchids. So we have about 40 native species, Kentucky, Ohio range. And really some wonderful, the lady slippers that most people recognize. But it's really important as ambassadors, as orchid societies and folks that we think about as either donating to those causes where there are good species conservation and rainforest preservation efforts, but also trying to grow some of the species to maintain those genetic diversity so that a lot of these habitats are being destroyed. A lot of these species are going extinct in the wild, so it is important for us as orchid societies to really consider trying some species and working as a conservation bank for those. So that's my species soapbox. But a couple of, one is Bulbophyllum on the lower right, Bulbophyllum pahudii. Smells like rotten sushi, but really a neat flower. The flower escape's about 4 or 5 inches tall. Really a neat species. That one came from Glenn Decker, believe it or not. When he was over several years ago, we traded some stuff. He goes, I got a great Bulbophyllum you'll like. And I'm thinking, these nice little things. And got the box, and it's this big old box, and all of a sudden they pull it out, and these leaves are like 2 feet long. I'm like, what did you just send me? But I absolutely love it. So a neat thing. Cattleya, coccinia, not coccinia, Cernua. Thank you. Cernua is a neat little creeping species. Anybody have any idea what this is? The genus called Lindleyalis, and the species is Saueri. It's a species that's named after it. Lindleyalis saueri. Bought it in bloom, believe it or not, at the Cincinnati Orchid Show on the sale table in bloom. Dr. Lore figured out it was a brand new species, so you never know what's going to sort of show up when you go look for those weird things at the shows. So as I mentioned, about 650 species in the genus, and there's still more coming online. We're still recognizing some new species here and there as things come around. Grow from sea level about 3,000 meters, so just about any temperature range that you can get into. They are generally epiphytic, growing on the side of a tree in the wild. So that's why you see what I've got growing in the net pots to get a little more air circulation around the pots, around the roots. But they also seem to do pretty well in solid pots. I see people growing them in bark. There's a few that you'll see that come out the bottom of the pot, like Stanhopea, for example. So obviously pot culture is not appropriate for that, but really well. So generally, even moisture is really what they're looking for. Intermediate temperatures, where most of them fall, so that range of 55 to 85 degrees is really kind of what we're looking for. They will tolerate ranges outside of that, but that's sort of the ideal. Really what we want to be with these guys. Medium to bright light, so we're talking about something that's a little bit brighter in a lot of cases than, say, pass or fails, but not quite up to Cattleya type light level. So somewhere in that range is what we're looking at. Moisture year round. They come from the rainforest of the equator area, so they don't really get a lot of dry spells where they come from. So evenly moist, and an even fertilizer. So as they're actively growing, just a normal fertilizing routine that you're going to be successful with. And then good air movement. As you've probably heard on many cases, as your collections increase, your air movement ought to increase as well. And just keep that air movement to keep down the problems. So just as, as the taxonomists like to get involved, they've now technically split Maxillaria into 17 different genus. And there's the list. I've now heard rumors that AOS and RHS are changing their mind and we maybe go back to all Maxillaria. So you'll see the other genus, some of these names pop up during the presentation just for reference purposes. But we're really referring to these all tonight as Maxillaria. When I worked with Eric Christensen in Florida on this genus a lot, his opinion was we really don't know a lot about this genus in the first place. Why are we already splitting it apart? Let's keep it together until we figure out more about it. And unfortunately, he passed away, so we don't have that expertise. But so I'm still sort of in the lumper category in this particular genus for a while. So what I've got for you is obviously the species name, where it's from, temperature range, whether it's, you're going to see pretty much epiphytic all the way across here, but that, and then the date is actually the date that it was first described, to kind of give you an idea of when the plant first came on the scene, just as kind of a reference point. But Maxillaria alba, that's in a 6-inch basket to give you an idea of the scale. Cute little white flowers, just kind of a clump growing. Grows a lot, sort of growth habit, sort of like tenuifolia, but a little bit bigger pseudobulb, but a neat little. I haven't noticed a fragrance on it yet, but most of the Maxillaria do have some fragrance. I'm trying to get more in that habit of sticking my nose into it. I'm just not, when I grow the bulbophyllums, it's,
Wear a mask.
That's right, exactly. My kids are almost trained not to stick their nose in it automatically, but I can still get them occasionally. Maxillaria arachnides, sort of a spidery shaped flower, and a lot of the maxillarias really typically bloom at the base of the plant. Some of them come up a little bit better like arachnides, so they come up out of the foliage a little bit and see. Some of them hang out really, and you'll see right down in the leaf axil, and you really kind of have to pick the plant up to see whether it's in bloom or not. But this one shows off nicely. The plant gets about 8 inches tall, 10 inches tall, and the flowers are about 3 inches across. So it's a nice sort of scale planted flower. And a similar one is Arachnidiflora. Little wider leaf, mature size is about 8 to 10 inches again, but the flowers are closer to 6 inches vertically. So it's a nice, fairly large flower, and they'll cluster up nicely. One of the other things that Maxillaria does is it really will produce, typically they're heavy bloomers in the spring, and they'll produce a heavy bloom flush, but they'll sometimes send up a couple early and a few afterwards. Some will rebloom in the fall. Some just sort of bloom sporadically through the year. Arachnidiflora seems to do its flush in the spring, and that's it, and it's done with. But it's definitely one that well worth growing for sure. A couple of you picked this one up. I think there's another piece over there, one called Bradii. This one comes out on it's in a 6-inch basket in the specimen here, but the inflorescence come out about 8 to 10 inches, so they really show off nicely. And this one kind of blooms all spring into early summer. So it's one that stays in bloom a nice long time. It just kind of keeps reflushing with flowers. Then if you don't have a lot of room, you can see my thumbnail in the bottom corner here. Atwoodiana. And this is very happy in a little 4-inch basket as a specimen plant. And just a cute little creamy flower. It's weird. The buds just sort of pop up out of the thing as these little fleshy. It almost looks like a slug sometimes. I'll pick it up and I'm like, that's got a slug. I'm like, no, that's a bud. It's kind of that similar look. It creates these really cute flowers, and this one just really flowers off and on all year round. So it'll take a couple of months off and rest, and then shoot up a few more flowers. It's not a heavy bloomer, but a really cute little species. Maxillaria augusta victoriae. This is one of the largest in the genus. That flower is almost 6 inches across, and it's not upside down. That's the way it grows. It comes out of the bottom of the basket. This is one that has to grow in a basket, but just really produces these magnificent big flowers. There is some discussion that some of the maxillarias will actually interbreed with Lycaste. They're very, very closely related, so there's some very similar look. So trying a few Lycastes to see if I can get them to grow so I can see if they'll cross, but sticking mainly with the Maxillarias. Maxillaria fletcheriana. Very, very waxy leaf. The flower is about 4 inches across. This is one that shows its flowers off well. The plant itself is about 24 inches tall. The inflorescence comes up almost to the leaf tips. And I've got one in it's about in a 4-inch basket, and it had 5 flowers on it this year on about a 3-growth plant. So it really likes to flower. And they're very long lasting. The flowers last 4 to 6 weeks. But are really, really waxy, especially the lip. But the whole flower is very waxy on its texture. Maxillaria grandiflora, and there's several in this group that sort of fall under grandiflora. They're still arguing whether they need to be broken out, but this is recognized as the true grandiflora. About a 4 or 5 inch flower. The plant is perfectly happy in a 16-inch basket, about 24 inches tall, but flushes with almost these. These really look like Lycastes to me, with these really beautiful crystalline white flowers with that yellow and pink lip. Really a beautiful thing. Tend to flower in the summertime for me, even though it likes to be a little bit cooler. It tolerates my intermediate conditions with no problem in flowers, but seems to be happier the cooler I can keep it. Maxillaria grandis, obviously another one that comes out the bottom of the basket. similar to the others, but again, a fairly waxy white flower, very, very dark lip. All the lips are hinged as well. You can kind of get in there and they fold down, which is kind of a fun little feature of Maxillaria. But this will have 8 to 10 to 12 flowers on it in the late spring. This was awarded at the Cincinnati spring show a few years ago. But a really neat species. And take a close look at that, because a close relative is Sandariana. A little bit bigger, and the lip tends to be a little bit more white, but otherwise the flower is very, very similar. From what I can see, I have not found a true Sandariana in my collection at point. They all keep turning out to be grandis. So these are other folks' images. So I'm still trying to figure out for sure exactly what the difference is. But this, my understanding, is that there's some difference in the lip that we're looking at. Maxillaria boliviarensis, and every one I've seen has these sort of funky flowers. They don't quite end up being a nice, true, symmetrical flower. They have the petals all sort of seem to twist a little bit for some reason. But that's in a little 3-inch basket. Whole plant is about 4 or 5 inches tall with a little 1.5-inch flower, but a cute little species. In a warmer growing from Venezuela, kind of a neat species. Maxillaria brunnea. This is one that really flowers very, very heavily in the late spring with a yellow base flower with that red overlay. It does come up very nicely. So the whole plant is about less than 12 inches tall, and the inflorescence come up about halfway on the plant. So it really shows off nice, and it really creates a nice flush. On a plant to 6-inch basket, it'll produce probably 12 to 18 flowers. So a nice little show. And a similar relative is Correcta, more of a yellow base flower, but you can kind of see there a nice long inflorescence that come up away from the plant. So the brunnea tends to hold it more vertical, where the Correcta sort of is a little more arching, and that doesn't support the flower quite as well as brunnea does. And my favorite Maxillaria of all time. So this is a funny story on this one. This one came in from Ecuador as Maxillaria ludio alba, which is a fairly standard species name. Too much up in the sun today. And bloomed it the first time, and it's like, that can't be ludio alba. It's too small, wrong coloration. So I sent some pictures down to Eric Christensen, and I got the, not seen that one before. But I'm working on my Maxillaria book, so I'm going to all these herbarias, and I'll see what I can find. So about a year later, it bloomed again, and I emailed him, and I said, "Did you ever find this thing?" And he said, "Well, send me a piece of the plant and a flower, and let me take a look at it firsthand instead of pictures." About 2 weeks later, I get an email from him, and it says it's finished. What does that mean? So it had an attachment, so I open it up, and it's a copy of the write-up that says new Maxillaria species from Ecuador, and with this name on it. And when I was in college studying to be a landscape architect, and you were seeing all the images now, Roberto Burley Marx practiced in Rio, and he came up to speak at the university, and he's the landscape architect that did all the really wonderful beachfront tile work that you're seeing in the Olympics right now, all the geometric patterns and everything. That was Roberto Burley Marx. So he had all kinds of bromeliads and orchids that were named after him that he discovered, and was a landscape architect. So I'm sitting there and saying, it'd be cool to grow up someday to be a landscape architect and have an orchid named after me. So when I got it awarded, it's now named as Maxillaria Sauer bucket list. So they do happen occasionally. And the nice part is it's an absolutely gorgeous flower and it's fragrant. A lot of times you get these flowers named after you and they're ugly or unattractive or something. So been blessed with two that were very, very attractive actually. Maxillaria ochraluca, very, very fragrant in this group, almost like hyacinths, very sweet fragrance. This one doesn't, flowers don't last super long on this particular species, but they all come out of the leaf axil bases, and all of a sudden, the flowers are there. I mean, it's very, very quick that they come out. The whole thing's in flower and really a beautiful thing. But you don't see the buds coming unless you really pay close attention because they hold real tight into those leaves. But a very, very easy one to grow. The next group, we're still arguing over the exact identification. This was awarded as splendens, but I'm 95% sure it's actually Boutenii. The one that's listed in Eric Christensen's book is a lot finer petals, identified out at Andy's Orchids in California, which I now have a piece of, and I'm waiting to bloom to see what the difference is, to actually see. But I'm pretty sure, based on reading the descriptions and things, that this is actually Boutenii. But very, very, very fragrant, strongly sweet, fragrant. It'll smell up the entire greenhouse. The flowers are crystalline white. They sparkle in the sun with that bright orange lip. And you can see they're very floriferous. But it only does it once a year. Generally February, March time frame for me. But a really magnificent, magnificent species. And then a similar one with yellow flowers is Striolata. And again, this group, you can see, they just produce tons and tons of flowers out of a single growth. I got a piece of this in from Peru Flora about a year ago. It was just a single growth plant with another growth coming, and it produced a group of flowers like that just on a single growth plant that had been imported not too long before. So it's a pretty prolific, very happy bloomer, as is all of this group. Maxillaria carunculata. Flowers last about 2 days, but it keeps producing, like a daylily, it keeps producing flowers. So it'll stay in bloom for 6 weeks or so at a time with these flowers that are about an inch across, but it's sort of a little bit of a gangly plant, so it kind of keeps growing up itself. So they'll be 18, 24 inches tall, but it'll produce these flowers at the leaf axis. So kind of an interesting, weird thing. There's some species of Maxillaria that you're probably not going to grow in a home culture. They'll produce a growth, and then they'll produce a rhizome that's about 3 feet long, and then produce another little growth. And the growths are only like 2 inches tall, with a 3-foot rhizome and then little flowers. So they can be kind of obnoxious in some of the species. Most are really grow nicely on a clump type plant. Another one in this group, very much worth growing, is lutescens. Again, the flowers only last a single day, but it keeps blooming, it keeps producing buds, so you've got lots and lots of flowers. But again, it's just this pure white with that yellow lip. It's just a stunning, stunning little species. Who says you can't grow coccinia? Here's the way to grow it. Cattleya coccinia is obviously a little more challenging, where this coccinia is very, very easy to grow. It looks like a parrot's beak to me a little bit, kind of an orangey red flower. And this flowers off and on all year round. My specimen's in a 16-inch Vanda basket, and it's hanging over the edges of it, and you sort of look up, and it's hanging up in the top of the greenhouse, which my greenhouse is fairly shaded, but it's hanging up in the top brighter part. You'll see these wonderful little red flowers up in there on a fairly regular basis, and then occasionally it'll do a really big flush with lots of flowers, and you really know it's in flower. Maxillaria crassifolia from Costa Rica primarily, but this will also be found up in the Caribbean, so fairly widespread. But this is one that I mentioned earlier that you really got to pay attention to the plant to see it in flower, because the flowers are all the way down in the base of the plant. So it's not super showy, but the flowers are really kind of attractive in themselves. And again, this is another one that flowers off and on all year round. So it's kind of one, but the leaves are very fleshy, almost Vanda-like in that real solid, rigid leaf. So very, very heavy. So it gets a little brighter light and just very, very happy little species. Maxillaria cuculata. This is a fairly variable species in terms of its color. And it flowers primarily in the late spring, but it'll flower again a little bit in the fall occasionally for me. I like the yellow form, in my opinion, the best. It's just a brighter flower. But they don't come out of the plant super heavily. They kind of get mixed in with the foliage a little bit, but produces a nice number of flowers as a nice species. One I like better in this group is Hematoglossa. That flower is pushing 3 inches across, so a nice species. It's actually in bloom, hanging outside right now, and it was also in bloom early in the spring. So it just kind of reblooms a couple of times a year. Fairly long-lasting flower, and that lip is just almost black. Just a really cute, neat little species. Plant's about 12 inches tall, so nice scale plant as well. This is a group of 3 Maxillarias, the Titibulbum. This is Cymbidiioides. And I want you to pay attention to the flower shape and things and see if you can tell me the difference between these as we go through the next couple of slides here. And this is why I'm asking you this is why there was a bunch of confusion on these 3 species and telling them apart. So this is Cymbidiioides, again, sort of like that Ochrolouca or Splendens group, flower right out of the base of the plant. And these will flower for about 5 to 6 months at a time, just kind of keep producing 1 or 2, 3 flowers out of each base of the plant throughout the spring. So a nice group of plants. Maxillaria nasuta. See any real difference there between that and Cymbidiioides? Kind of similar. You know, this is what, when you're doing identification and you're doing things off of photographs, you don't have anything of scale, right?
Larger sepals.
A little bit. You'll see here in a second for sure. And then the other one, this one's a little easier to tell apart because it's a little weirder looking, is Proboscidea. It comes up a little longer inflorescence and the petals recurve fairly heavily on this. So, luckily, about a year ago, I had all 3 in bloom, which I didn't realize that what we had. Picture in the middle, the flower on the right is nasuta. The flower in the center is Cymbidiioides, and the one on the left is nasuta. You can also see the difference in the lips. So again, same order, nasuta, Cymbidiioides, Proboscidea. And you can see when you see nasuta and Cymbidiioides, lip is very distinctively different, and nasuta is significantly larger. When I had Cymbidiioides awarded the first time, Eric Christensen was in my greenhouse, and I was lamenting that my nasuta, I kept reading the documentation saying this flower should be over 4 inches across, and it's a little 2-inch flower. I'm like, well, it's a little crappy nasuta. He said, well, it's not nasuta, it's Cymbidiioides. Read the description, there you go. So we finally figured out, got all these things together, and now realize they're very easy to tell apart. Now that we can see some detail in the lip and size. But the plants themselves look very similar. The Cymbidiioides is slightly smaller, but really, when you put them together, you really can't tell the difference. It really has to do with the flower scale and that lip. So that's what we're playing with in the Maxillarias, is still learning. So when you've got a picture or two of something that doesn't necessarily even have a scale to it, very, very difficult. Or, again, when you look at these 2 flowers on the front, they don't look any different. But when you turn them and start looking at them from the side, that's when it gets to be really very obvious. Maxillaria densa. This one is kind of a creepy, crawly Maxillaria. I've got a big specimen of it in a Vanda basket, and it just kind of crawls on itself. But it produces almost a golf ball sized cluster of these white flowers at the leaf axil right above the pseudobulb. So lots and lots and hundreds of flowers on a plant, but just not large, but it produces a pretty good show for what it does. This is becoming another favorite, Desvaudiana. The flower comes right up out of the base of the pot and points upwards. So the photograph is looking directly down at the pot. You can see it kind of looking upwards. Sort of looks like that little shop of horrors. But it's really a long-lasting flower, and it's that's a 3-inch pot, so it's a fairly large flower. and really, really attractive. It's just you got to pay attention to it, or you're going to miss the flower with where it's it doesn't come up and really show itself off, unfortunately. But a really neat one. Then if you've got a little bit of space, this is a really neat species called Eleator. My plant that's now getting upwards in the range of where it can be awarded is now 4 feet tall and close to 4 feet wide. And it just, these clusters and growths, it just keeps growing up and getting larger and larger. But it produces these 2-inch flowers, and it'll produce 50 or 60 flowers on the plant in the springtime. So it's just a beautiful rusty red color. So you don't necessarily have to let it get that big and obnoxious. You can divide it, but I want to see how big it really could get. So it's just a neat species that you'll find around fairly frequently, but it's...
What is the black?
Right here?
Yep.
It's a staminode.
It's
Yep. Yeah, you can see actually probably that was popped off with the yellow pollen exposed there. So there's some really nice color combinations in these flowers as well. Maxillaria ferdinandiana, kind of a leafy little plant, tiny little flower in the center of the pot. So it's a miniature. It never really gets out of a 3-inch basket for me. But it flowers a couple times a year. So this is sort of one of those collector items that, if you're going to try to grow all 650 of them someday, you got to have it. But not one that you necessarily start out as growing. This, on the other hand, Maxillaria fractiflexa. That's in a 6-inch pot. These flowers push 10 to 12 inches tall and have those handlebar mustache petals. And they all sort of each have their own little bit of a personality. They twist a little differently. But really a magnificent species. This one does prefer to be on the cooler end of the intermediate, but it is absolutely a magnificent species. It does show itself off nicely. Maxillaria fraudulenta. This name came from Eric Christensen. This one had been floating around the trade for quite a while, and he finally identified it as a new species. So he just called it was fraudulently, but passing itself off as another species, so that's what he called it. Kind of a fun story, but nice pure white flower. And the lip, when you get down into the lip, you'll see the next flower, and the petals hold more straight horizontally out of the group is the differentiation between the species compared to gray eye. So gray eye has those petals that sort of flop over and hold is really the difference, but otherwise the flowers are very, very similar. Pull them apart, the lip looks very similar, so it's really the form of the flower that we're seeing as the difference. This is a cute little species. That's in a 4-inch basket called Bacillus. It's actually blooming for me right now, but it'll flower a couple of times a year. But they're 3/4 of an inch across on the flowers. But a cute little, real nice grassy plant. You can see it's only about 5 or 6 inches tall. So it's a cute little, beautiful species when it's not in bloom too. It's kind of a cute little attractive plant. But just really produces these nice flushes of flowers. So you can see these plants really like to flower and bloom. Maxillaria hedvigii, very widespread species, very easily identified, crystalline white flower with that little orange lip. It flowers a couple of times, several times a year. It'll almost be in bloom. Not so much in the heat of the summertime, but the rest of the year you'll see it in flower.
I have one. Again, a lot of sun? It just doesn't bloom.
If it's not blooming, I give it a little bit more light, but I would not go full sun by any means. And a similar species, sometimes these are confused, but this is Richii. The difference is the hedvigii does not have purple buds. This gets a really beautiful purple-pink bud, very, very striking. And the flower opens up. Unfortunately, it doesn't really hold that strong color. It's more of a white flower with that pink blush on the back of the flower. But again, it'll flower But they're all down in the center of the plant. You kind of got to pick the plant up a little bit and look at it. But it'll flower fairly frequently throughout the year as well. This is one that really likes to flower. And it does it twice a year. Steve Helbling came up with that, if you guys know Steve Helbling. So it does come, yeah. So I thought it was a good name. That's in a 6-inch basket. This had 260 flowers on it when it was awarded. And it just, clonal name just describes it very, very well. So it's a very well-behaved plant, and just, I love the spidery flowers, and it just covers that plant. So a neat little, neat species. This is a different one that came on the market 2009, so fairly recent introduction. The leaves are very terete, very long, slender. They're very, very fleshy and rigid, almost like Brassivola, very, very similar to that. Pointed leaves, and it gets this really neat little rusty red flower. So this one's really bright grower, almost up. I'm hanging it up with the cattleyas, and it seems to be perfectly happy, even at moist, but really an unusual species. Maxillaria jurgensii. These flowers can almost be pure black. Shunkiana can be a little bit darker, but this one will grow. But the leaves are almost look like pine needles. Fairly small species, typically mounted, but really cute. The flowers pop with that real dark burgundy color. Really pop off the foliage, so it's a really neat color. This is the start of the Ludio alba group, Dilloni. About a 4.5 inch flower. This one is one that doesn't have quite as good a form as the others, but it's in bud again right now. It bloomed around February time frame, and it's in bud again for me right now. But you can see it produces lots of flowers. It does have a light fragrance to it, but again, it's fairly large. It'll be, the leaves are close to 24 inches tall, so a decent sized plant. Leptocephala, kind of a white or a yellow sort of form, a little more spidery. Again, 4 or 5 inch flowers. In this group, most of the plants are 18 to 24 to 30 inches tall. I mean, they're a fairly large plant. They like to get into a fairly large mass of plant, into a 12 to 16 inch basket, and they really get happy at that point. And they'll produce these flushes, amazing flushes of flowers when they get a little bit larger. This is the largest in the group, Longipetala. This was my first Maxillaria. Unfortunately, it's a was. It passed when I really didn't know a lot about it. It was identified. It really got sick when the Maxillaria book came out, and I'm reading about the species, and the only known cultivar in cultivation was owned by Sauer. I'm like, oh. So no more. So we're still trying to find another one. So that happens occasionally. Maxillaria lutea grandiflora. This is a magnificent species. I've got 2 awarded clones. And this one is very fragrant. I take an blooming orchid to the office once a week, and it stays there for the week. And so this one, the one 20 fantastic years, I named after my wife and I's anniversary, because it blooms on our anniversary in the middle of December every year. So I had it awarded. And so this past December, I took it to the office, and it had a nice set of blooms on it. And really I noticed the fragrance to it, but nothing of really super consequence. So about, 10:30, I walk out into the lobby area, which is where our restrooms are, and I'm smelling this very strong honey fragrance. I'm like, is that the plant? And about that point, the office manager came back and said, people are starting to complain about the fragrance of this flower. And about that point, we went back, and the air conditioning system had picked it up, and it was now wafting through the entire office from this one plant in the lobby. So, it's middle December, so the first reaction was, well, can you take this thing out to the car? And I'm like, no. Well, let's take it down the basement. No. So we found a giant trash bag, and we put it in the giant trash bag. It was okay for the rest of the day until it had to go home. So, but very, very strongly. It smells, the identification feature, it smells just like honey, but a very, very strong honey fragrance. Maxillaria rubioi, it's a smaller one in the group, and a little more spidery flower, but it's kind of an interesting flower as well. Then some smaller ones, Maxillaria lilliputiana. This is, again, about 4 to 5 inch tall plant with about an inch flower on it. So there's a whole bunch of these Maxillarias that are in this range that if you're growing under lights or windowsill or something that are behave themselves, you don't need to grow these big 30-inch monsters. I like them, but sometimes not enough room. Lindleyana is another one. This one really likes to flower. About an 8 to 10 inch plant with about 3-inch flower on it. Maxillaria longissima. It sometimes, it kind of comes up, but a lot of times it definitely needs to be grown in a basket because the inflorescence will kind of come out of the side of the basket, but they always have this sort of drooping flower, but they're 4 to 5 inches across with a really cute, colorful flower. This is another favorite, Malleagris, and I've got the visions of this over there. I grow it either potted or mounted. It doesn't really seem to care. I think it shows off the flowers a little bit better mounted, but you can see it just produces all of these flowers. And it'll flower from about November all the way through March with flowers, and it's just a really neat, not a very tall, maybe 10-inch tall plant with about an inch and a quarter flower, so a cute little species. This is a lot of fun. Marginata, for the obvious reason, with that nice picotee around the edges of the flower petals. It runs a little bit. You can see the pseudobulbs. It'll produce about a 2 or 3 inch rhizome between the rhizomes, but it behaves itself in a nice basket. But it really sends out these nice long flower inflorescences with about 1.5 inch flower on the end of it. And it blooms, again, a couple times a year. And it had, this past spring, it had probably 20, 25 flowers on it. So a real nice bloomer. This just finished flowering for me, Phenocanthera. About a 2-inch flower, a little rigid leaf that gets about maybe 14, 15 inches long with about 1.5 inch flower. So really beautiful sort of earth tone flowers on it. We were talking about Picta earlier with a gentleman up here, and this is really, it's got a nice fragrant flower to it. Blooms in the spring. Very easy one to grow. Behaves itself, it really produces a nice specimen in about a 6-inch pot, and really blooms very, very heavily. Another close relative of that is Ubatubana, and the difference is this flowers in the fall. So if you like the flower and you want it twice a year, well, get one of each, and then you can have it bloom twice a year. But literally, I've pulled photographs and pulled these flowers apart, and I can't tell the difference other than the time of the year that they're flowering. I can't tell the difference between them. Procurans. This flowers off and on all year. That's pictured in about a 4-inch pot, but mine is now probably pushing 36 inches tall. It just sort of keeps rambling up a stake and growing on itself, but it produces these about inch-wide flowers. And there's different versions of this. There's sort of this pale pink color. There's a close to yellow color version in this group, but it's kind of a neat little space. It doesn't take up much bench space. It just needs some air space going up there. It needs air like a skyscraper real estate. I'll let you guys take a shot at the name of that one. It's pretty easy. There you go. Yeah, it's pretty easy to look at. Pseudo-Reichenania.
Easy for you to look at.
It's all Latin, you know. Named after Reichenheim, who was a botanist. pseudo, which you'll see actually Reichenheimiana next. But it's really a beautiful plant. The spots on the leaves are not disease. That's the natural, and it varies in the plant itself. So some will be almost totally silver. Some will have more spots like this. The back of the leaves have a nice purple flush to them, so the leaf is actually a very attractive plant. And it really produces these nice 1.5 to 2-inch spidery flowers, and lots of them when it blooms. So it's a really neat species, and I like this version of the two of them. This is, I think, is the more attractive of the two species. So there's Reichenheimiana. So not quite as attractive as the foliage. It doesn't have that purple backing on the leaf. The flowers are a little more yellow. So just not quite as pretty as the pseudo-Reichenheimiana, but one that's still worth growing. I've not tried it yet, but I've heard rumors that the other difference is that you can sort of rub the spots off of the pseudo-Reichenheimiana, and you really can't off of the Reichenheimiana. Is another differentiating identification, but I'm not sure why I'd want to destroy a leaf to find out. So then we can get into some really miniature stuff. That's on a 2-inch square piece of cork to give you an idea of the scale of this. But you can see it's a Maxillaria. It likes to flower, and it just produces lots and lots of flowers. This belongs to Steve Ryan in our Orchid Society, if you know Steve up at our show. But you can just see it's just covered with flowers. So that little plant will produce 15 or 20 little flowers in that tiny little plant. Maxillaria ringens, a lot of times is sold as Shepardii. There is no such real thing as Shepardii. It's actually truly ringens. Again, a nice yellow flower with that orangey lip. And again, it's just a really heavy floriferous bloomer and relatively easy to grow. Another one in that group, Weber Baueri. Sometimes not so often is seen as Aurorae, but its true name is Weber Baueri. The true distinguishing feature on that is when you pop the staminode off, the staminode cap is fuzzy, is the reason for that picture. So that's how we identify that particular species. Really beautiful lip, and again, a very heavy flower. Two forms of Maxillaria rodriguesiana. There's a Costa Rican form and a Panamanian form. The Panamanian form is significantly larger. It is in bloom for me right now. The flowers are close to 10 inches tall. It is the most magnificent thing. A couple of spots up in the petals, but mostly kind of a creamy white. The other Ecuadorian form, heavier flower. It'll produce 50, 60 flowers in a basket, but really sort of holds the petals more horizontally, but the flowers are probably only 4 or 5 inches, 5 or 6 inches across. Still a fairly large flower, but not nearly as large as the Panamanian form. Sanguinea. This is another one that is really easy to grow, something like Brucellus. The awarded forms of this with the CCMs, the Certificate of Cultural Merit with the American Orchid Society, number the flowers in the thousands on specimens of this. The pseudobulbs are about the size of a nickel, so really sort of a nice small pseudobulb with a really nice grassy leaf to it that are maybe 10 inches long, and it'll produce tons of these really beautiful little flowers. Very, very happy bloomer. So when I mentioned earlier, Schunkiana, this is almost true black, is about as black of a flower as I've ever seen. And just, unfortunately, right down in the center of the plant, so it doesn't show off super well. But it does flower throughout the year, which is a neat feature of it. Sophronitis. So you can grow Sophronitis, just like you can grow Coccinia. Similar color, that nice orangey red color. This also blooms several times a year, and it produces, the little growths are only like 2.5 inches tall, and it rambles. So my specimen is in a 10-inch basket, and it's overflowing a 10-inch basket, and it just produces these beautiful flowers. So it's not one, it's easy to grow under lights, it just sort of rambles, not long distances between growths, so it's not obnoxiously rambling, but it'll make a big specimen fairly easily, and well worth growing. So beautiful, beautiful species. Very spectacular species. Striata, that flower is pushing 6 inches across. And it comes up, it'll bloom. This particular clone is a good bloomer. Last late spring it had 14 flowers on it. And just a magnificent, magnificent species. And that stripe and that lip is just absolutely magnificent. The picture doesn't do it really justice, but it is that striking in person. Tenua bulba. This one flowers down to the plant. It's almost never out of flower. It takes a little rest and it just rambles all over itself. Creates a nice clump of plant with these little flowers that are maybe ½ inch across in the base of the plant. So easy one to grow. Not a pretty plant. Like I said, it rambles all, roots all over itself, but an easy one to grow. And the one we all know, Tenuifolia. A couple of different color forms of it. They're all yellow with a varying degree of red overlay. This does smell like coconut, for those of you that have not grown it. Very easy to grow. Will produce nice big specimens over time, and will flower a couple of times a year. There are some clones out there that are on the market, and if you get one and it does not flower, just get rid of it. This should flower very easily for you. There are some clones that just do not flower. And we're not sure why, but something in the genetics, but it should be one that flowers very, very easily for you in that wonderful coconut fragrance. Maxillaria tonsbergii. It's another fairly large, about a 5-inch flower, and really kind of a striking burgundy with yellow. There's only been, to my knowledge, 2 clones of this found in the wild, so it's very, very rare. Both have been awarded and floating around. This is a clone called Sonoma that I was able to get a piece of. But a really beautiful thing. Blooms really easily, so hopefully we'll be able to get it propagated. One of the problems we're finding with maxillarias is they do not self-pollinate very easily, if at all. So it's very difficult to get seed. So if you can imagine on some of these rare plants, if you've only got one and they won't cross-pollinate, it's very difficult to get seed off of them. Maxillaria turkellii, named after Marnie Turkell out of California, described in 2000. This really is kind of a pretty plant. Not a real big plant, but what's weird is the flower comes up and it points straight down. So you kind of got to pick the pot up and look at it from beneath to enjoy the flower. But a really pretty pink and white flower. Maxillaria uncata, very easy one to grow. It's going to have a nice big specimen in a 4-inch pot. The leaves are only maybe 1.5 inches long. And this again will flower off and on all year round for you. You might recognize the clonal name on this one. It came out of your society. Ralph and Judy sold this to me many years ago as Maxillaria rufescens. Found out that it was not rufescens, but a new species called vanillosma. Anybody want to guess what it smells like? It very much smells like vanilla. It's absolutely a wonderful fragrance. There's a piece of it over on the sale table if anybody's interested. But it's a long-lasting. The flowers will last almost 2 months. Not a heavy flower, but it does flower on a regular basis. But a neat species. Maxillaria variabilis. This you'll find around fairly frequently from growers. What we're finding is this is true Maxillaria variabilis, and what is making that is the dark, sort of a dark purple flower, and almost a perfectly round pseudobulb is Maxillaria variabilis based on the description. So the next one we're talking about is probably not Maxillaria variabilis, because that's as far as we had gotten into them. But there's a whole bunch of things, and they all have longer, thinner pseudobulbs and things, and it's probably a result of interbreeding of species, likely. But really, any of them called variabilis floating around out there, very nice to grow. They produce nice big specimen plants with lots and lots of flowers on them. Available in the sort of the burgundy color, yellow colors, and anything in between. And again, almost always in flower. So a nice little fruit to grow. Another little one, vernicosa. Nice pine needle pincushion type of look. Again, that's on about a 2 to 3 inch square piece of cork. So little tiny flowers. Steve Ryan, this is Steve Ryan's also, he likes growing these little guys. He always brings these, and he and I compete in the Maxillaria class, so he brings these things in with tons and tons of flowers on them, but I bring the ones with the great big flowers on them. I'm like, well, judges, you decide. So I usually win. But it's fun, we enjoy all those. Maxillaria Whitney, not a heavy flower. This is one, it'll produce 2 or 3 flowers at a time and do its thing, but about a 2-inch flower. So another one in that group. Whitsinoides, you can tell that it's not real obvious when it's flowering. For some reason, it almost seems to flower on the backside of the plant. It grows pendulous, so sort of grow it with the pot or mounted up the top. And for some reason, the flower always seems to grow on the backside, so you got to kind of turn the plant around to see if it's a flower. But it's a kind of a green color, about the same color as the plant. The plant just keeps getting longer and longer, and that flower is maybe only 5/8 of an inch across. So it's one of those weirdos that you kind of got to grow in the collection. So this is a new species that Dr. Christensen was working on describing before he died, unfortunately, and it didn't finish, so we're still working. It's just finished blooming again. But it's got this really neat picotee flower, so I don't know what this is called yet. So, but these things do still keep popping up occasionally in collections. So just to wrap up, again, easy to grow with lots of flowers. A couple times a year or almost all the time, which is great. Low to bright light. Some of the little miniatures grow a little bit darker, but most if you give them good strong light, they're going to do very, very well for you. Evenly moist. I haven't found any that really like to dry out. Any questions?
What is their natural pollinator?
I don't know. I'm assuming that it's probably either bee or moth, but probably more bee because they're fragrant during the day. Would be my guess, but I've not found anything that really talks specifically about them. It's a good question. I'd like to know.
Are there hybrids?
There are some hybrids. Equigenera has been making more and more hybrids. There's some between striata and what do they cross it with? A little one called pumila, which just sort of looks like a miniature striata, so it's not quite so big. There's some crosses, which I'm not sure whether they're truly crosses between Grandis and Sanderiana, because I'm not sure what the difference is. It may just be that. There's some crosses between Sanguinea and Tenuifolia, which looks like a little, either a miniature, it looks like miniature Tenuifolia, or it looks like a big Sanguinea. So it kind of makes a nice balance between the two. So, there's probably, what I've seen, maybe a dozen to 18 hybrids, so not a lot, but there's more and more coming. I'm more interested in the species just because there's not a lot of them out there, so haven't messed with the hybrid yet. Any other questions? That's okay, we've got it. Fertilizer, I use a combination of either, and I sort of flop back and forth between the Michigan State fertilizer and the, used to be Scott's CalMag, but it's now Jack's Professional CalMag, and sort of flop back and forth between those.
I was going to ask, I noticed in your photographs, the leaves on some of the plants appear to have those like little black spots on them. Is that typical?
It's a fungus that you'll find. Oncidiums get them.
Yes, yes.
It's the same stuff, so it doesn't spread. It just spots the leaves, and a lot of times what I find, especially on the Maxillarias, is when it gets hot. So either you're going to spray a lot of fungicide, which is expensive and not so good for our health, or put up with some spots on the leaf. So I prefer to put up with a few spots.
I'm like, yeah.
And one of the judges was looking at a plant and he's like, well, there's spots on the leaves. And I'm like, well, do you want to spray a whole bunch of chemicals, or do you want to put up with something that the plant's sort of naturally doing and that's out there? So I prefer to be a little more on the cinnamon, Neosporin sort of range when there's problems. Along those lines, pests and diseases, find some scale will get on them, occasionally mealybug, and it really depends on the species. Some seem to not get anything, some of them seem to attract it. So the bigger leaves like the Lutea grandiflora seem to get the scale a little easier than some of the others. But again, treating with any of the normal pesticides, the alcohols or the soaps or whatever you like to use. If anybody hasn't told you yet, mealybug and scale are both the same. They run on about a 7 to 10 day life cycle. So you need to be treating, when you find those infestations, you need to be treating at least for 3 consecutive weeks, if not longer, to make sure you break that cycle and get rid of them. A lot of times, well, I treated my mealybug and now they're back. Well, that's what they do, because these treatments typically only hit the adults, and you don't need to break that egg and juvenile cycle. So that's why you need to do it weekly and very diligently for that 3 to 4 weeks. I usually go even 4 to 5 weeks just to be safe. But playing around, and you've got to mix up. I mean, I'm finding some scales that are being very, very resistant to even things like malathion, which is a little scary. Because it seems like malathion should take out just about anything. So I'm trying some of the soaps, and it's like, well, we'll suffocate them and see if that works. So really being aware of what, but paying attention. If you guys haven't had Bill Thompson from the Bulbophyllums, he had a great thing that you can do is have your spouse or a friend of yours, hide a cord or something on your pot in your greenhouse or your growing area and see how long it takes you to notice it. That's the sort of the level that you ought to be paying attention to your growing area, your plants. Is just watching for those changes and subtle changes in your growing area is always a good idea, just to keep an eye on what's going on.
Thank you so
You're
much.
One more.
Question? I have a Maxillaria with smart rubescence.
Okay,
Now, what did you call it?
it's probably vanilla osma, like vanilla with
Vanilla?
vanilla osma.
Judy Nagel gave it to me.
It's going to be vanilla osma because it's probably the division of that same plant.
I
Yeah.
saw that Ralph's name on it.
Yeah. If it smells like vanilla, it's vanillosoma. If it doesn't smell like vanilla, it's rufescens.
Okay,
But chances are, knowing where it came from, it's probably vanillosoma.
okay. That's what I want. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Folks,